And tonight, the vault is open.
47 people filed formal witness statements. Not rumors, not social media posts, not second-hand accounts. Formal signed witness statements submitted to the investigating authority within 72 hours of the event. 47 people who did not know each other, who arrived at the bridge from different directions, who had no prior contact and no shared social circle, who ranged in age from 19 to 71, who included a retired engineer to nurses, a police officer, a school teacher, and a pastor. 47 people who described the same thing, in the same detail, with the same specific language, something they saw on that bridge in the 14 minutes before it collapsed. The government's official report used the term mass hysteria to explain the witness statements. It used that term on page 4, and then it spent the remaining 61 pages explaining the structural failure. It did not spend a single additional page on the 47 statements. I filed a Freedom of Information request for the full witness documentation 18 months after the report was published. The request was denied. The reason given was material not relevant to concluded investigation. 47 signed statements. Not relevant. I've been doing this long enough to know what agencies protect and why. They protect embarrassments. They protect negligence. They protect liability. They do not usually protect witness statements from a structural failure inquiry, unless the statements describe something the structural failure doesn't explain. This took me 2 years to piece together. I want to tell you what I found. Chapter 1: The Silver Falls Bridge. The Silver Falls Bridge crossed a river in a rural county in the Pacific Northwest. It was not a famous bridge. It was not a landmark. It was the kind of infrastructure that exists in the background of daily life. The kind people drive across without thinking about it. The kind that appears in local news only when something goes wrong. It was built in 1961st, steel and concrete, rated for a standard load capacity consistent with its traffic volume. Inspected on a regular cycle by the State Department of Transportation. The last inspection before the collapse was 14 months prior. The report rated the bridge as structurally adequate with minor surface deterioration noted. It was flagged for routine maintenance, not urgent intervention. Routine. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, the bridge collapsed into the river below. 11 vehicles were on the bridge at the time of the collapse. 4 of them went into the water. 7 were on sections that held long enough for occupants to escape on foot. 3 people died. 19 were injured. The recovery operation took 11 days. I'm not going to use the names of the people who died. Their families have been through enough. What I can tell you is that the youngest was 23. She was driving home from a job interview. The investigation began within hours. State and federal engineers, the National Transportation Safety Board, a parallel inquiry from the county. 3 separate teams examining the same collapse from 3 different angles. Their conclusions were consistent with each other. Metal fatigue in a primary support structure, accelerated by water infiltration in the concrete foundations. The maintenance flag from 14 months prior had not been acted upon in time. Negligence. Institutional failure. A system that deprioritized rural infrastructure until it was too late. That conclusion is probably true. I'm not arguing against the structural finding. What I'm arguing is that the structural finding is not the whole story. Because before those 11 vehicles drove onto that bridge, there were people who stopped. The traffic camera footage from the county road approach to the bridge covers the 45 minutes before the collapse. I obtained a copy through a separate state records request that was processed before the federal inquiry absorbed the case. In that 45-minute window, 11 vehicles stopped at the bridge approach and did not cross. Not because of a traffic obstruction. The road was clear. Not because of a signal or a warning sign. There was none. They stopped. They sat for varying amounts of time. And then they turned around. 11 vehicles. In 45 minutes. On a road that averaged 3 to 4 vehicles per hour at that time of day. The probability of 11 independent drivers making the same spontaneous decision to not cross an apparently clear bridge in a 45-minute window. I put that question to a statistician. She said the probability without a shared cause was effectively 0. There was a shared cause. The 47 witnesses describe it. The formal statements were submitted by people who were present at or near the bridge in the period before and during the collapse. Some were drivers who stopped and turned back. Some were people on the riverbank below. Some were residents of properties with sightlines to the bridge. 47 people. Different positions. Different distances. Different angles of view. All 47 statements contain the same description. A figure. Standing on the bridge. Not walking. Not running. Not distressed. Standing. At the center of the bridge's pedestrian walkway. Facing the water below. The figure is described consistently across all 47 statements as tall. Thin. Dressed in something dark. Not moving. Just standing. The traffic camera footage covers the approach road. It does not cover the bridge deck itself. There is a gap in the camera coverage precisely at the bridge structure. I spent 3 weeks trying to find out why that gap existed. Whether it was standard for bridges of that type and era. Whether there had ever been a camera covering the bridge deck. I found a maintenance record from 6 years before the collapse. It referenced the removal of a bridge deck camera. The reason given was equipment redundancy following system upgrade. The replacement camera that should have covered that gap was never installed. I put that in front of a former transportation department engineer who asked not to be named. I asked if that gap was standard procedure. He said no. A bridge deck camera removal requires a documented replacement plan. There is no replacement plan in the records you're describing. That gap should not exist. I asked when the removal was authorized. He told me to look at the authorization signature on the maintenance record. I looked. The signature belonged to a mid-level administrator in the State Infrastructure Office. I'm not going to name that person here, because that person died 8 months before the bridge collapsed. The camera was removed 6 years before the collapse, authorized by someone who would not be alive to answer questions about it when the collapse happened. I don't know what that means. I want to be careful about the inference. What I know is this. There is a gap in the camera coverage precisely where 47 people say they saw something. And that gap was created by a decision that can no longer be traced to a living person. The figure the witnesses describe was seen for approximately 14 minutes before the collapse. Multiple witnesses state that it did not move during that entire period. It did not react to the sounds of the structural failure beginning. It did not move when the first section of the bridge began to shift. 3 witnesses who were on the riverbank directly below the bridge described the same final moment. They say that in the last seconds before the collapse, the figure looked up, not down, not at the water, up directly up, toward the sky. And then the bridge came down, and the figure was not among the recovered debris. It was not found in the river. It was not among the injured. It was not among the dead. 47 people saw it. The government said it wasn't there. Chapter to what the statements actually say. I obtained 17 of the 47 witness statements, not through the federal inquiry. That request was denied. Through the families of the witnesses themselves. 12 of the 47 people I contacted directly agreed to share their statements with me. 5 others were shared by family members after the witnesses themselves declined to speak publicly. I want to tell you what those statements actually contain. Not the summary. Not the characterization. The content. Because the government's use of the term mass hysteria implies something specific. It implies that the witnesses influenced each other. That a shared panic produced a shared hallucination. That the figure was a product of collective psychological stress in a traumatic situation. Mass hysteria requires contact. It requires a mechanism of transmission. Fear spreads through a crowd because the crowd can see each other, can hear each other, can feel the emotional contagion moving through shared physical space. The 47 witnesses were not a crowd. They were distributed across a significant geographic area around the bridge. The riverbank witnesses were below and separated from the road witnesses by terrain and elevation. The residents with sight lines to the bridge were in their homes. Several of them were alone when they saw the figure. 4 of the witnesses had already turned their vehicles around and driven away from the bridge before the collapse occurred. They submitted statements describing what they saw before they left, before any collapse, before any emergency response, before any event that could have produced collective panic. Those 4 people saw the figure before anything went wrong, before there was anything to be hysterical about. I spoke to one of them directly. Her name is Carol. She was 63 at the time. She had driven that road twice a week for 11 years. She knew the bridge the way you know any piece of infrastructure you've used thousands of times. Background familiarity. Unconscious. She told me I came around the bend and saw the bridge and I slowed down without deciding to slow down. My foot just came off the accelerator. And then I saw it. I asked her to describe what she saw. She said a person, standing at the railing, the center of the bridge, very still. Just still. People don't stand that still. I asked what she meant by just still. She said when people stand somewhere looking at a view, they shift, they move their weight, they raise a hand, they turn their head. This person did none of that. For the entire time I was watching. It was the stillness that made me not cross. I asked how long she watched before turning around. She said maybe for minutes. And then I turned around. I didn't know why. I just knew I wasn't going to drive across that bridge while that person was standing there. She found out about the collapse on the radio 40 minutes later. She submitted her statement the next morning, before she had spoken to any other witness, before the government inquiry had begun collecting testimony. Her statement describes the figure in precise detail. Tall, thin, dark clothing, standing at the center railing, facing the water, completely motionless. I read her statement and then I read the statement of a 26-year-old man who was on the riverbank below at the same time. He had gone down to the river to fish. He was alone. He had no contact with Carol or any of the other road witnesses. His description of the figure is the same, word for word in several places. Tall, thin, dark, motionless, center of the bridge, facing the water. 2 people, 2 locations, no contact, same description. I put those 2 statements in front of a forensic psychologist who has worked on eyewitness testimony cases for 16 years. I did not tell her they were from the same event. I asked her to evaluate them independently. She said these statements are consistent in a way that argues against independent fabrication. When people fabricate descriptions, they diverge in ways that reflect individual imagination. When people genuinely observe the same thing, they converge on specific details that reality enforces. She paused. The stillness detail is significant. Multiple unconnected witnesses independently identifying the same quality of abnormal stillness. That's a real observation. That's not mass hysteria. That's a shared perception of something that was actually there. I asked her what she thought was actually there. She said I can tell you what the evidence supports. It supports the presence of a figure on that bridge. What that figure was, that's outside my area. I want to tell you about the pastor. His name is Reverend Michael Aldrin. He was 71 at the time. He had been the pastor of a small congregation in the county for 33 years. He was driving home from a hospital visit when he came to the bridge. He stopped. He saw the figure. He did not turn around. He told me he got out of his car. He walked to the edge of the bridge approach. He stood there and looked at the figure for what he estimated was 6 minutes. I asked him why he got out of the car. He said because I recognized him. I asked what he meant. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I have sat with people at the end of their lives for 33 years. I have been in the room when people leave. And there is something in those rooms. Not always, but sometimes. A quality of presence that doesn't belong to the living person anymore. Something that arrives as they go. He paused. What was standing on that bridge had that quality. It was not a living person. I am certain of that. I don't know what it was, but I had felt that specific presence before, and I recognized it. I asked what he did after 6 minutes. He said I got back in my car. I drove home. I called my wife. I told her I loved her. I asked why. He said because something was about to happen. I didn't know what. I just knew. 12 minutes later the bridge collapsed. He submitted his statement the following morning. He has never spoken publicly about it until he spoke to me. He said the government called it mass hysteria. I've been in rooms with mass hysteria. I know what that looks like. 47 people did not share a hallucination. 47 people saw something real. I asked him what he thought it was. He said I think there are things that exist at the boundary of events, that appear before catastrophe the way pressure appears before a storm. I don't have a theological framework that fully accommodates it, but I've stopped needing my framework to accommodate everything I've experienced. I've thought about that for a long time. The boundary of events. Something that exists at the edge of what is about to happen. Motionless. Facing the water. Not warning anyone. Just present. There is one more thing in the witness statements that the government report does not address. It appears in 9 of the 17 statements I obtained. 9 separate witnesses describing the same additional detail. A sound. not the sound of the structural failure. That came later. This was before. A low sound, described by multiple witnesses as resembling a voice but not containing words, more like a sustained tone, coming from the direction of the bridge. Not loud, not alarming, almost gentle. One witness described it as the sound a place makes when it's about to stop being. I have no framework for that sentence. I've tried to build one for 2 years. I haven't found one yet. Chapter 3: What the pattern shows. I want to start with something I didn't expect to find. I wasn't looking for other cases. I was focused on Silver Falls, on the statements, on the camera gap, on the authorization signature. But when you spend enough time inside one case, adjacent cases find you. A researcher I contacted about the forensic psychology of eyewitness testimony sent me something after our conversation. She said she thought I'd find it relevant. She didn't explain why. She just forwarded a document and said read page 11. The document was an unpublished academic paper, submitted to a journal in 2019, rejected. The rejection letter cited insufficient empirical framework. The paper was written by a sociologist named Drive. Warren Chu at University in the Midwest. Page 11 contained a table. The table listed 7 bridge collapse events across North America over a 40-year period. For each event, it listed one specific data point: the number of pre-collapse witness reports describing an anomalous stationary figure on the bridge structure. 7 collapses, 7 entries in the table. All 7 had reports. The numbers ranged from 3 to 47. Silver Falls was at the top of the table. 47 reports, the highest number recorded, but it was not the only one. A bridge in Minnesota in 1981st, 11 witness reports describing a figure. The official inquiry classified the reports as stress responses inconsistent with structural causation. The bridge had been flagged for maintenance 9 months prior. The maintenance had not been completed. A bridge in Ohio in 1994, 22 reports. The inquiry noted the reports and then stated witness accounts of this nature are not within the scope of structural failure analysis. The bridge had been flagged for maintenance 2 years prior. The maintenance had not been completed. The bridge in British Columbia in 2003, 19 reports. The Canadian inquiry used a different term than mass hysteria. They called it collective perceptual distortion under environmental stress. The bridge had been flagged for maintenance 18 months prior. The maintenance had not been completed. I stopped reading the table at that point. I went back to the top and read it again. 7 bridges, 7 collapses, 7 sets of witness reports describing the same figure. And in every single case, the bridge had been flagged for maintenance. And in every single case, the maintenance had not been completed in time. I called Warren Chu directly. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had read his paper. I told him about Silver Falls. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said Silver Falls is not in my table. I said I knew. I told him the number. 47 reports. He said that's the highest I've encountered. I asked why his paper was rejected. He said the journal said there was no empirical framework for the central question, which is accurate. There isn't one. But that's not a reason to ignore the data. That's a reason to build the framework. I asked what the central question was. He said whether the figure the witnesses describe as a cause or effect. Whether something appears at these bridges because they're about to fail, or whether the appearance of the figure is itself part of what causes the failure. I had not considered the second possibility. I asked him to explain it. He said I'm not claiming the figure brings down bridges. I want to be clear about that. What I'm asking is whether the presence of something at a specific location produces measurable effects on that location, not through supernatural mechanism. Through physics we don't yet fully understand. He paused. Sound, for example. Certain frequencies produce structural resonance. The right frequency sustained for long enough can compromise a structure. If whatever the witness is a proceeding produces a sustained low frequency sound. I thought about the 9 witness statements. The low sound. The tone that wasn't words. The sound a place makes when it's about to stop being. I asked Chu if he had found sound reports in his other cases. He said in 4 of the 7. Yes, low frequency. Sustained. Described consistently as coming from the location of the figure. For 7 bridges. A low sound before the collapse. I sent you the 9 statements describing the sound at Silver Falls. He read them and called me back within an hour. He said the descriptions are consistent with infrared frequencies below the threshold of normal hearing. Infrared produces specific physiological responses: unease, disorientation, a sense of presence, a feeling of being watched. I asked, could infrared at the right frequency compromise bridge infrastructure? He said at sufficient intensity and duration. Yes, it's documented. It's called resonance failure. It's how the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed in 1940th. Wind produced a resonance frequency that the structure couldn't absorb. I asked, so whatever the witnesses were hearing, he said, could have been doing exactly what wind did to Tacoma Narrows. Not through malice, not through intention, just through the physics of frequency and structural resonance. I asked the question I'd been holding back. I said, what is producing the sound? He said, that's the question my paper can't answer. That's why it was rejected. He paused. But I'll tell you what I think. I think there are things that exist at specific locations under specific conditions. I think those conditions include structural instability. I think these things are not causing the failures. I think they're responding to them. The way certain animals respond to seismic activity before an earthquake. They sense something humans don't. They move toward it rather than away. I asked why they would move toward it. He said, I don't know. But predators move toward wounded prey. Certain insects move toward dying wood. Maybe whatever this is, moves toward structures that are ending. Drawn to the ending. Standing motionless at the railing. Facing the water. Waiting for what's already decided. I've spent 2 years trying to find a cleaner explanation than that. I haven't found one. There is one more thing I need to tell you about. It took me the longest to confirm. I almost didn't include it because I could only verify it through a single source. But the source is a former employee of the National Transportation Safety Board. She worked there for 14 years. She left in 2018. She contacted me after I published a short piece on the Silver Falls inquiry. She asked to meet in person. We met in a coffee shop in the city. I'm not going to name. She brought a folder. She put it on the table between us. She said, I'm going to tell you something. And then I'm going to ask you not to contact me again. And I need you to agree to that before I say anything. I agreed. She said there is an internal category within the STEB incident classification system. It is not published. It is not referenced in any public documentation. It has existed since 1978. She slid a single page from the folder across the table. The page was a section of what appeared to be an internal classification manual. The relevant entry was highlighted. The category was labeled Pre-Collapse Anomalous Witness Phenomena. Below the label, the classification instructions read, witness reports of this category are to be collected, documented, and forwarded to the designated review office. They are not to be included in the public inquiry record. Standard explanation for omission: material not relevant to structural analysis. Material not relevant to structural analysis. That was the exact phrase used to deny my Freedom of Information request. The exact phrase. I looked up from the page. She said that category has been active for 46 years. I processed 17 files under that classification in 14 years. Silver Falls was not one of mine. But I know it was filed. I asked where the files go. What the designated review office was. She closed the folder. She said, I don't know. I processed and forwarded. I never received anything back. In 14 years. Nothing came back. She stood up. She picked up the folder. She said they'd been collecting these reports since 1978. 46 years of pre-collapse witness phenomena. Filed somewhere. Reviewed by someone. Never returned. She left. I sat there for a long time. 46 years of reports. From bridges and presumably other structures. All describing something that stands motionless and faces the water and waits for what's coming. Filed. Reviewed. Never returned. Someone has been reading those reports for 46 years. Someone knows what's in them. Chapter for the thing that doesn't fit the official story. The government's use of mass hysteria is specific, deliberate, and drawn. I want to explain why it's wrong. Not emotionally. Technically. Mass hysteria as a clinical phenomenon requires 3 conditions. A defined group in shared physical proximity. A transmission mechanism for the psychological contagion. And a triggering event that produces the initial stress response. The 47 witnesses at Silver Falls met none of those conditions. They were not a defined group. They were strangers distributed across a wide geographic area. There was no transmission mechanism. They could not see each other. They could not hear each other. The road witnesses and the riverbank witnesses were separated by the rain. And the triggering event, the collapse, had not yet happened when the first reports were generated. For witnesses submitted statements describing the figure before the collapse occurred, before there was any event to trigger a stress response. You cannot have mass hysteria before the thing that causes the hysteria. The government's own investigators knew this. The forensic psychologist who reviewed the statements for the inquiry. Our preliminary notes were included in the draft version of the report. I obtained those notes through a source inside the inquiry team. I'm not going to describe how. In those notes, she wrote the witness accounts do not meet clinical criteria for mass hysteria. The geographic distribution and temporal sequence of the reports argue against a shared psychological response to a shared stimulus. An alternative framework is required. That sentence does not appear in the final report. Between the drafting, the final publication, that sentence was removed, and the term mass hysteria was inserted in its place. Someone made that change. Someone reviewed the forensic psychologist's preliminary conclusion, disagreed with it, removed it, and replaced it with a clinical term that the evidence did not support. I tried to find out who authorized that change. The inquiry team led declined to speak to me. The forensic psychologist declined to speak to me. 3 other inquiry team members declined. One of them, a structural engineer who worked on the physical failure analysis, agreed to speak briefly on the condition of anonymity. I asked him about the witness statement section of the report. He said I worked on chapters 2 through 5. The structural analysis. I had no involvement in the witness statement section. I asked who did. He said it came back from review already written. We didn't draft that section. They arrived. I asked what he meant by arrived. He said the inquiry produced its technical findings. Those went to review. The report came back with additional sections already written. The witness section was one of them. We were told it had been handled by a separate team. I asked what separate team. He said I was told not to ask. He paused. I'm a structural engineer. I've worked on 11 collapse inquiries. The witness section in this report is not written the way engineers write. It's not written the way psychologists write. It's written the way people write when they want something to be over. The way people write when they want something to be over. I've read that section of the report many times since that conversation. He's right. It's 3 paragraphs. The term mass hysteria appears twice. There are no citations. No referenced methodology. No named reviewer. 3 paragraphs to dismiss 47 signed statements from a retired engineer, 2 nurses, a police officer, a schoolteacher, and a pastor. 3 paragraphs inserted by a separate team that nobody was allowed to ask about. And somewhere in a filing system that has existed since 1978, 47 more statements sit in a folder under the classification pre-collapse anomalous witness phenomena, forwarded to a review office that has never sent anything back. I've thought about what it means that someone has been reading these reports for 46 years. It means they're learning something. You don't maintain a classification category for nearly half a century unless the reports are telling you something worth knowing. Unless a picture is forming across dozens of cases, across decades of pre-collapse figures standing motionless at railings. What picture has 46 years of reports produced? What does the review office know that the public record doesn't say? I don't have those answers. I want to be honest about that. What I have is this. 47 people saw something real. The evidence supports that conclusion. The clinical framework for dismissing them doesn't hold. The structural engineer who worked on the report confirmed the witness section arrived pre-written. A former STEB employee confirmed the classification category that has existed since 1978. And the sociologist's rejected paper shows that Silver Falls was not unique. That this has happened at least 6 other times, across 40 years, at bridges that were all flagged for maintenance, that were all allowed to fail. The figure doesn't appear at bridges that are fine. It appears at bridges that have already been decided, structures that are ending, and something that moves toward endings. Standing at the railing, motionless, facing the water, waiting for what's already coming, not warning anyone, just watching. The Silver Falls Bridge was replaced 2 years after the collapse. The new bridge opened without ceremony. The county held a small memorial for the 3 people who died. Local news covered it briefly. The 47 witness statements remain inaccessible through public records request. Carol still drives that road twice a week. She told me she slows down every time she approaches the new bridge. Not because she's afraid. She said she doesn't know why. Reverend Aldrin retired from his congregation last year. He told me in our last conversation that he has thought about the figure every day since October. He said it changed something in how he understands his own theology. I asked what it changed. He said, I used to think the boundary between life and what comes after was something only the dying crossed. I don't think that anymore. I think sometimes what's on the other side crosses toward us. I don't know why. I'm not sure it matters why. What matters is that it's real. Dr. Warren Chu resubmitted his paper to a different journal last year. It was rejected again. He told me he's going to keep submitting it. I asked why. He said because the data is real. And real data doesn't stop being real because no one wants to publish it. The former STEB employee has not contacted me again. I kept my agreement. The internal classification category for pre-collapse anomalous witness phenomena is still active. As far as I can determine, the reports are still being filed, still being forwarded, still not coming back. Somewhere there is a review office that has been reading these reports since 1978, that knows the pattern across dozens of cases, that understands something about what appears at structures before they fall, and that has chosen, for 46 years, to keep that understanding inside a filing system that the public cannot access. I don't know if that's protection. I don't know if it's suppression. I don't know if the people in that review office are frightened by what they've read, or indifferent to it, or something else entirely. What I know is that 47 people told the truth. A retired engineer, 2 nurses, a police officer, a schoolteacher, a pastor. They signed their names. They submitted their statements within 72 hours. They described the same thing in the same detail without contact or coordination, and the official record called them hysterical. The next time you drive across a bridge, you probably won't think about this. But if something makes your foot come off the accelerator before you decide to slow down, pay attention to that. Carol did. She's still here. Subscribe to William's Vault. New cases every week. I'll see you in the next one.
Tonight's file is closed, but the secrets below never sleep. Subscribe to hold the key to your return. And now, the vault is closed.